Hi, it's Kevin Bates here, the CTO of Artima, and I noticed a report the other week that Coinbase is moving away from using the Optimism roll-up stack for their layer 2 blockchain called Base, and they're moving to an in-house system to do the final settlement and confirmation on Ethereum of their blockchain. And I think this actually is interesting because it shows something about how traditional financial institutions, which Coinbase is in the process of becoming, are moving away from the original ideas behind blockchain, namely the idea that you don't need a central authority to handle financial transactions the way our financial systems have always worked, and that you can have a decentralized system instead. This move away from the significance of the underlying principle of blockchain, the decentralization, is part of the system being adopted by the financial institutions. And that may sound contradictory when you first hear me say that, but hear me out. So what the financial institutions have discovered with regards to, for example, Ethereum, is that the EVM, the smart contract languages, the gossip network, all the top layer stuff that transactions are constructed from and how they're interpreted turns out to actually be surprisingly good. And it kind of enforces a standard on all the financial institutions that they haven't managed to independently come up with. We currently have masses of diverging and separate payment systems across the globe between different jurisdictions and between different entities. So it's kind of like the financial world has hundreds of different languages spoken, and then they have to translate to communicate with each other, and that makes things like international remittances slow and error prone. And now there's this one system and a whole ecosystem of developers who know how to use it. And here's the thing that, if you are an Ethereum developer, you may notice, is that actually the consensus system underlying all this is, generally speaking, irrelevant to you on a day-to-day basis. You just assume it's there and that it works. And what you're concerned about is writing these smart contracts, instantiating tokens, producing systems that allow you to exchange them or transform them or whatever it is that you want to do with them. And you just assume that the underlying system will function reliably. And from a traditional banking point of view, this consensus system isn't needed. If you have a few central authorities and you have regulation and you have reputation, then you don't need to have a decentralized system. In fact, the banks actively discourage that, because the way they make money is by being the middleman sitting there taking a small cut of what's going on. And we as a society have put up with that for a long, long time, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. This stuff is all baked into the way that society works. So going back to the original thing about Base, you can deploy a layer 2 blockchain that actually doesn't care about settling on Ethereum. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Coinbase moves to that. Binance is kind of already there, because they don't send optimistic roll-ups or ZK roll-ups onto the Ethereum chain to confirm that their chain is doing the right thing. They have a bunch of validators, which last time I checked were all run by Binance itself. So it really does kind of function as an Ethereum clone with the consensus system ripped out from underneath it and a centralized authority put in its place to ensure finality and settlement. And I don't think this is going to change in a hurry. And so people who are staunch blockchain supporters may be disappointed by this. It feels like a corruption of the original idea. Personally, I don't find it surprising. That's kind of the way that adoption was always going to go. Initially, they ignore it. Then when it turns out that it's actually a useful and efficient system and has lots of functionality that the existing systems don't have, then they try to co-opt it. And there is one silver lining for those decentralization maximalists out there, and that is that the decentralized systems such as Ethereum and Bitcoin have been around so long now that I do not expect them to go anywhere. And that means ultimately there is always an escape, especially given the fact that you can bridge from chain to chain. So that means you could be using an established bank's not layer 2 anymore, I don't know what you would call it, but their chain. And then when you decide that you don't want to rely on the bank's system anymore, you can bridge your assets to the decentralized system. Anyway, I mean, I could talk about this for quite some time, and I think this video's gone on for long enough, but it's just an observation as to where I think all this is going to be going in the sort of short to mid-term. And ultimately, I think it will be good for the system, because the more developers there are out there who understand how all this stuff works, the more there will be developers who initially are introduced to it through the centralized copy of the system, but then discover that there are these decentralized versions that have this whole extra dimension that is missing from the CeFi or TradFi attempts at co-opting it. That's it for today. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye for now.